Welcome to another fresh edition of Galaxy Line, an edition I call the World Cup Season Edition. I'm Sheikh Wadiri, your regular host, and it's good to see you out there. I bring for your viewing pleasure today a legal expert who's been in practice for over 2 decades, 10 out of which he spent in the United States of America handling complex litigations and settlements, including jury trials. Back home in Nigeria, he has served as in-house counsel, general counsel, managing partner of a law firm, as well as advisor to senior government officials and key government institutions. For instance, he was advisor to the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority on consumer protection within the aviation sector. He championed the development of the current aviation consumer protection regulations, including the Passenger Bill of Rights. As a consumer rights advocate, his skills in negotiating and deploying appropriate extrajudicial resolution mechanisms has settled many knotty business and other related disputes in favor of the consuming public. No wonder, therefore, he was placed on the highly exalted seat of Chief Executive Officer of the Consumer Protection Council of Nigeria some 14 months ago. This is Barrister at Law Babatunde Irureka, the Director General of the Consumer Protection Council, CPC. Most welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. It's nice to have you on seat today.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back after this time out. Stay with us. Welcome back, and let's quickly go to the real business now. In the next hour or so, I shall be rubbing minds with the Director General of the Consumer Protection Council, Barrister Babatunde Irukera, on the consumer rights issues and how they relate to the national economy. Yes, Mr. DG, well over a year now since you've been Director General of the CPC. What's been your experience? The job generally?
I would say interesting. It's been a cocktail of some of what I expected, many of what I didn't expect, and some of what I could never have contemplated. But having said that, I think it's a privilege to serve first in any senior government role, but more so in a role that allows me to truly express my passion, which has always been consumer protection. The consumer protection space in Nigeria is still not a very good space. But I discovered in the past year and a little above it that it is not entirely for a lack of will or lack of intention, including on the sides of some of the companies, but it's really been mostly on account of whether we're harnessing the entire assets and opportunities and resources across the board to ensure that we have a robust consumer protection framework and enforcement mechanisms. And I think that in the past year it's gotten better, but I'll also be the first to admit that there's still quite some road to travel.
What would you say is your major achievement so
far? Wow. I think, for me personally, I think it's too early for me to even, I think stopping by to
even if it's 3 days, you must have
I think
been able to do something.
So for me, I would say my most important achievement is just the realization of how terrible the space is. And I think it's also, I think it's an achievement for me to be humbled by the fact that there's so much to do and there's only so much you can do. But from a practical, tangible standpoint, I think a few things. First, the Consumer Protection Council is more visible than it has ever been. People recognize the council a lot more, and some people have just come to know it for the first time. I think we're more efficient. We're receiving a whole lot more complaints. My understanding is that complaints have gone up 60%, and we're resolving a whole lot more. And I have engaged industry a lot, and I get the impression that industry recognizes the role of the council. They respect it, and they're all, I mean, most are generally willing and ready to collaborate or cooperate to respect the rights of consumers. I think that those for me are very important landmarks. But the most important one is the fact that more consumers feel that they have a voice and that someone's out there to protect them.
And of course, you probably would have had some moments of frustration even within this 1 year. What could this be, if any?
Challenge is more like it. First, the biggest challenge that I have experienced is the fact that you have an organization based on the structure and the resourcing framework that's still somewhat struggling, at least when it's compared with the scope and the magnitude of the mandate, and certainly the market. I mean, the Consumer Protection Council is the market regulator for protecting 180 million people. Most businesses, whether foreign or domestic, they're keen. The biggest interest in Nigeria is the market. People are more interested in our market than they are even in the oil. And so to imagine that the Consumer Protection Council is the regulator of that market and still has to struggle with resource and strategy, I think that that's been the biggest challenge. But I'd also say that although it's the biggest challenge, but it's also the area where we've made the most progress. I mean, I'd say that the current administration, the federal government, has already paid significant attention to consumer protection work and the organization as itself. And they've provided incredible support and even resource allocation. And so going forward, I've seen that things will get much better.
Before your arrival at CPC, you were largely practicing your advocacy on the side of the masses of the people. Now as DG, an appointee of government, hasn't your allegiance shifted to government rather than to the masses?
Well, actually, no, because in reality, there's an alignment in that. We've had previous successive governments that didn't recognize the most important role of government in consumer protection. It's a constitutional responsibility. It's number one responsibility of government is to protect the citizens. And protection is not necessarily against territorial aggression or insurrection. It's really to protect their rights. And by the very nature of democracy or governance generally and constitutions, we the citizens in some sense surrender some of our liberties and our prerogatives to our government, which is fine. But what we never do is to surrender our prerogatives or our liberties or our rights to fellow citizens. And so what a government must do must at least protect citizens from being exploited by other citizens, whether corporate or otherwise. And so what I found is that the government is the policy arm of the advocacy or the litigation that I spent most of my professional career doing. And so being in a position where you can use that policy to align with what the advocacy is, I think puts us on the same side and provides an incredible opportunity to really change the space.
Now, let me also ask you this, because I had once also acted in DG capacity. How does the people on ground receive you? Because it's, when somebody new from somewhere else, not within the mainstream, gets appointed, gets some kind of resistance, I don't know what your experience has been.
The interesting thing is that the Consumer Protection Council is actually a unique organization. In my experience, there has been unique. I was very warmly welcomed, actually, to my surprise.
To your surprise?
To my surprise. Yes, I was warmly welcomed when I arrived there. And I had a lot of friends and other people.
In-house there?
Well, I'd consulted with the organization for a period, so I knew people there.
Okay.
And so I wasn't among strangers.
Okay.
But even then, as I was going in as Director General, a lot of my friends outside of the place tried to advise me about the difficulty of dealing with the existing structure and the bureaucracy in government, and how potentially that could prevent success. But my experience so far has been that I haven't had that kind of resistance. Now, if anything, I think the people are working as hard as they can. I think I have increased the tempo and the intensity of how they do their work in the council, and I think they've received it well. They've received it well. This country has a great asset in that organization, in the sense that a good number of the people there truly desire and have the passion to do exactly what they come there to do, which is to protect consumers. And I think that's a great asset.
Taking up this kind of job is seen by some analysts as signing one's death warrant, as it were. That's because of the dangerous nature. You know, it's like the Kunyili's kind of, missions. Very dangerous indeed. For you, how does it feel?
Well, first, I don't think that is the case. I mean, I recognize the potential danger of challenging criminal enterprise or organized crime. I recognize that. But, I mean, the reality of it is that if I had the opportunity, I'd rather sign my death warrant myself than have someone else sign it. I'd rather go doing exactly what I like to do than someone else sign it. But more seriously is the fact that considering those dimensions are really the greatest restraint to performing the best we can. And so if in a bid to preserve my life, what I do is allow consumers' lives to be jeopardized, then at the end of the day, what's the whole purpose of it?
The job.
Or even of living. I mean, and more recently, I had an experience that showed to me that it's almost the biblical, he who tries to preserve his life will lose it. Because it turns out that the dangerous products that get into the market would somehow find their way into your own stomach. And so there is some element of enlightened self-interest to make sure that you're protecting the market.
I think you were trying to give us an experience you had recently.
Yes.
I think you better go deep down.
Okay, well, about a few weeks ago, we conducted a sting operation in Uyo, and that was based on intelligence. We had credible and actionable intelligence that substandard, contaminated rice was coming into the market. And so we conducted surveillance over a period of time and planned an operation. I decided to personally participate in the operation, so I flew to Uyo, and what I found out was stunning. The kind of rice that we saw in the market was just incredible, and we busted 3 locations. One was in the market, one was a depot, and another one was a warehouse. And it was the level of impunity that I found most astounding, especially the one in the market, because what we discovered was in the market you had the storefront where rice, fish, and everything was sold. And at the very back of that storefront, right on the other side of that wall, was a criminal enterprise bagging contaminated rice. I mean, and the contamination didn't need to get to the lab for you to determine it was contaminated.
Really?
You could literally see the rice. You could see the mold was coagulated.
Why would human beings do this?
A question that I'm still trying to find an answer to. And so my sense of that is I can determine where I buy my rice. But rice is what we eat most in this country. At least it's my favorite food. But so how many, so if I eat rice 10 times, perhaps at most 6 I eat in my home. The remaining 4, if I'm not visiting with someone, it's probably in a restaurant. And so that's why I say there's some element of enlightened self-interest. If I allow that rice in the market, there is no telling and there's no way to know that I won't end up consuming it myself. And so that's the point I meant by, if you really look at it, that it's better to proactively attack what might kill you than wait for it to actually kill you. It's almost the same, I mean, the proverbial, if you surrender, I would kill you. If you fight, I would kill you. So there's a chance that you won't die is by fighting at all.
Exactly. Is Nigeria's corruption stigma irredeemable? This is
No,
a part of the corruption
no,
we're talking
absolutely
about.
not. No, I mean, and my optimism is not is not based on hope. It's based on reality. For instance, in this past experience I had, there was a reverse. I mean, I understand the corruption at different levels, but there's almost a perception that the vast majority of the corruption, or the worst type of corruption, exists at the very most senior level in government, and that might very well be the case. But what I found in the engagement that I had in Uyo and after it was I was the most senior government officials who I engaged, who were most transparent and very eager to support, and that's the only reason why the operation ultimately succeeded, both pro, during, and post. But what I found is that there's a fundamental humanity and morality that needs to exist in society that's missing in ours. It's not, I won't attribute it to a governance issue, and it's more a civic issue, because the question I would have of myself if I was going to trade would be, would I put this kind of product in trade knowing that people would eat it? And so if we cannot answer that question to ourselves, if we can in trade prioritize money over lives, then quite frankly, that's really where the work is, not some corruption in the government. And I'm not, I'm not trying to underplay corruption in governance, because I believe that even sets the tone for society. But I'm saying that my experience is such that the problem is both ways. There's a supply side and there's a demand side. At the lower level, just being able to find a bulwark of people in government who are supportive of this criminal enterprise clearly demonstrates to me that the supply side, in some sense also fuels the demand side.
Okay, what's the scope of CPC's operations? It's like it's rather too wieldy, meaning therefore that you may have been biting more than you can chew. I don't know whether you understand my question.
I do.
There's so many areas of public consumption of goods and services. So what's the scope really?
Well, the scope is very wide.
Very wide.
Yes.
Unwieldy.
I won't say unwieldy, but it is wide. And it's really the question of how well you're able to deliver on that comes down to operations and strategy. And so I get this question about, are we biting more than we can chew repeatedly? And it's quite, it's almost a which comes first, the chicken or the egg question. Because I ask the question, I say, what exactly are you supposed to bite? And if the answer on what you're supposed to bite is what the law says you should do, then you're either biting as much as you should chew, or you're not biting enough to chew. And so we operate exclusively within statutory mandate. Now, is that mandate really wide? Yes. Does it present a potential capacity challenge to the Consumer Protection Council as it is today? Absolutely, that's the question, and without a question. And so what we have been doing, and what we're doing a lot more, is expanding our collaboration with other sector regulators to leverage on their strengths and their capacity to do the best we can to protect the market in the best way we possibly can.
What or which areas of consumer rights infringement are you focusing most?
Well, our focus is across the board. It's really a question of how we're working with the different regulators, because there's really no way to focus on one at the expense of the other. For instance, in any one day, I'm going to get some people who are extremely aggravated about estimated billing in electricity supply, which is a legitimate problem, or mass disconnection. And so we focus on that. But food and drugs is also fundamental. But gratefully, we've got Food and Drug Administration and the Standards Organization that we can support, or that can support us. And so we also focus some resources on that.
What's the level of collaboration in that particular area between you and NAFDAC?
Very good. We've got good relationships, and I've been in communication with the Director General of NAFDAC, and I found in her very open and collaborative approach. They're obviously very passionate also about making sure that substandard food and adulterated and substandard food and medication do not make it into the market. She's also in particular very passionate about drug and substance abuse in the market. And so I say that from having a heart in the right place, having the energy and the willingness and understanding that a broader team is how to accomplish these goals, I'd say that she's fantastic. The same thing with the Director General of the Standards Organization. We're both lawyers. I didn't know him before he became Director General, but in the period that we've had to work together to protect the Nigerian consumers, we've built an enduring friendship.
In the area of telephony services, which of the consumer rights abuses do you consider most terrible, most irritable?
You know, it's interesting that you'd ask this question because only last week a team from the Consumer Protection Council met with the team at the Nigerian Communications Commission led by the Chief Executive and the Executive Vice Chairman. And one of the outcomes of that discussion was a joint inquiry with respect to consumer protection in the telecommunications industry. The big things I see there, one is a lack of transparency. People really don't know how the billing operates. I think that needs to be more open. It's too opaque and people really need to understand exactly what they're paying for. And then unsolicited subscriptions. I think the current system seems to be an opt-out, meaning that if you're subscribed to something and you don't want it, you go opt-out. But I think it needs to change. You need people's consent to subscribe them to something that will cost them money. If it's a free subscription, you can use the opt-out approach, but when people are going to pay for something, it must be a deliberate opt-in. Service quality continue to be issues, and then in the data space, there's a complete lack of transparency in data. Whether unlimited data really constitutes unlimited data, whether you use up all your data or you're able to roll it over. But what is interesting is that in that meeting, I found out that the Communications Commission has already issued a number of directives and is addressing quite a number of those things, and we're looking to collaborate with them to expand enforcement and compliance.
Yes, that leads me to the next question. It's generally believed that CPC, I mean your council, is more or less a toothless bulldog. How do you react to that?
Well, it depends on who is saying it. I mean, if consumers say that the CPC is a toothless bulldog, I feel bad, and I'd say to that consumer, you know, try us if you have a problem. We'll be happy to do the best we can. But if an operator or a manufacturer says the CPC is a toothless bulldog, I'll say, you can find out.
Find out from them?
No, I mean, they can find out by violating the law. And
okay.
I mean, I've had people from outside the CPC and from within the industry refer to me as a pit bull. And so, I mean, whoever wants to risk finding out whether this dog has teeth can roll the dice. Can roll the dice.
Right. Violators of consumer rights in Nigeria arrogantly bluff the consumer as if it does not matter in the scheme of things. What's your take on this?
Saddening. It's very saddening. I give credit to the people in the Consumer Protection Council for doing the work they do, and they come there every day and work very hard every day. But like I said initially, I'll still be the first to admit that on a scale of 1 to 10, we're still doing very poorly with respect to how respected consumer rights are and how well, how responsive companies and service providers are to consumer rights.
Yes, I was also going to ask your relationship with the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN. I think they are you know, a body that you should relate properly with if you are really going to minimize, you know, the problems that consumers have. What's your relationship with MAN?
Well, I mean, I have one-on-one relationship with a lot of the companies in the association. I've spoken at events at the association itself. I've had engagement with.
Do you do it one-on-one with the industries, or you deal with manufacturers association?
I haven't. I mean, I think I'm moving into a. I mean, we have a few meetings coming up, so I think we're getting to a point of dealing with the manufacturers association as a whole, but with other associations who are part of the manufacturers, for instance, Association of Food, Beverage and Tobacco Employers. We engage them at the association level to discuss how to approach consumer rights and complaints, especially with respect to complaint resolution and compensation when the product causes injury or falls short of consumer expectations. So there is an ongoing engagement both on an individual company to regulator basis and then at an association level.
One or two quick ones. For a judiciary said to have been so seriously compromised and handicapped in some ways, how do you get it to assist in speedily securing remedies, when consumer rights are violated?
Well, I mean, I think what it is that the challenge we have with the judicial process is really an infrastructure challenge. Like many of the other challenges we have, speedy redress is one of the key mandates of the Consumer Protection Council. And one of the things that I've repeatedly advocated and I'm hopeful would happen is a potential change in law that would create a create a tribunal of its own so that the consumer issues can proceed in a speedier fashion, in a more specialized area where the judges are trained specifically to understand.
That's what you look forward to?
We look forward to that.
What about technology coming into play?
Well, I mean, from the judicial process standpoint, technology is not such a, I mean, I cannot contribute to the technology. But from the complaint resolution process standpoint within the Consumer Protection Council, we're looking to actually launch a brand new complaint resolution mechanism, which is a completely new and automated system. It's been about a year and we've been building it, that would harvest complaints far more from many other channels, telephone applications, SMS, online, and you'd allow you to upload videos, receipts, everything into your complaints. And what we're also doing is getting companies to plug into it. So what happens is that when we receive these complaints, we're able to push it out to the company using technology. And I think that that's really going to be a game changer. So certainly we are using technology to improve the experience.
Okay, on that very positive note, we are going to be drawing the curtain on the show for today. Like I said, it's football season, so this show cannot start at 11 as we normally do. All the same, the little time left, we've been able to utilize properly, and I want to thank my guests, Barrister Oluwatunde Iru Kera.
Thank you so much for
Thank you. I really enjoyed every bit of the time we spent together.
I enjoyed myself too.
I only look forward to having you again because there's so much more to talk about.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for sparing time to be with me on the show today. I'll be back next week. I think football should be over by next week, so we'll revert to 11 o'clock starting at 11. I'm Segun Adiri. Have a happy weekend. Bye-bye now.